welcome to today's Urban Conversation. How can large corporates with campuses that employ thousands of staff better manage their water resources and consumption? Here are insights from Shubha, a water expert from Biome, and Madhu Menon, the CFO of Tesco, India. Shubha Ramachandran is a water sustainability consultant with Biome Environmental Solutions, and Madhu Menon, the Chief Finance and Administrative Officer at the Tesco Hindustan Service Centre. While Shubha joins me to discuss better water management at large corporate setups, Madhu shares some of the cool ideas Tesco has executed at their 15-acre Bangalore campus, which houses more than 7,000 staff. Thanks to supporting brands Vivanta by Taj, Shopper Stop, and Argyem in association with the India Water Portal. Shubha, first question to you. When it comes to large corporate campuses, specifically, let's say in the IT and BPO sector, where thousands of employees work, what are the challenges when it comes to managing water as a resource as well as its consumption?
Across India perhaps, and specifically in Bangalore, a lot of the corporate houses are coming around in the peripheries of the city, where there is no city-based water supply. Water typically comes in from private suppliers like water tankers, which again draw their water from groundwater sources in probably a 1 to 2 kilometers radius, and the availability of water which is drawn from borewells, sometimes in certain cases from borewells that are present on their campus itself. So the management to know the waters of different qualities and quantities that are available to them from the various sources and just making sure that there is sufficient supply to deal with the demand is quite a major issue that corporates have to deal with. Subsequently, the next thing is to do with the consumption of water itself within the campus. In a campus which is primarily corporate in nature, the needs are domestic. So you're either using it for flushing, for washing vessels, if there's a canteen, or there's gardening. So those are the primary uses. Demand, about 160 liters is towards the cooling towers itself. Yeah, buildings that have water-cooled cooling systems, there is a lot of water requirement just to keep the systems running.
And is that water requirement higher than, let's say, the water required to clean the building or for flushing?
Yes, in fact, in certain cases, I can tell you where a particular campus that I know of, which has about 10-11,000 employees, of their 400 kiloliter daily demand, about 160 liters is towards the cooling towers itself. There are choices that you can make between a water-cooled cooling system or an air-cooled system, and then also questions of how much cooling do you really need, what is it that you can do to kind of make sure that your requirement on water is not so high. The problem's further compounded because the water that's used in cooling towers has to be of a quality even superior to drinking water. It has to be very low on conductivity. So the treatment that this water goes through, and then the moment your water is not of appropriate quality, the system, it's called a blow down. The water is blown down and not used in the system itself. And this water is very hard. So what do you do with this water that comes out? How do you make sure that the water used in the cooling towers is not much in excess? That's a big problem that companies have to deal with. In addition to that, there's also the question of how employees perceive water and how much water do they use when they're washing their hands or when they use the toilets, or even otherwise where taps are leaking, not reported. A lot of the employees are not connected to the system, so they don't really, normally at home perhaps they might be aware of how much water is being used. So consumption, how do you drive down consumption, is something corporates have to deal with. The next step is, once water is used, most corporates these days are mandated by law to treat their wastewater and reuse it within the campus. And once the water is treated, the question is, what do you use it for? Broadly, the uses are flushing or gardening. So there is only this much that you can do with flushing. You don't want to increase the consumption on that side anyways. So the next thing is to use it for landscaping. And typically the numbers are such that the landscaping sometimes then starts to be used as a sink for wastewater, because you're not able to further up the end use to which you can put the treated wastewater to. What is the next use to which you can push treated wastewater up to? Can it be used for groundwater recharge? How would that be appropriately used? Can it be used for certain other processes, or can it be sent to other industries or landscaping outside of your campus? Can it be further treated, let into lakes? So there needs to be some kind of a system, technology, people coming together to see what can be done with treated wastewater.
That brings me to the next question. So when it comes to corporates, then what can they be doing,
to tackle these challenges. And perhaps here, Madhu, you can explain, all the things that Tesco has done at their Bangalore campus, because I hear you've done a lot of interesting things to, to both control the consumption of water and boost your own, recycling chain.
Right. So when we set up the campus, 8 years back, so, we started with a recycling unit. So we've got a, fairly large STP unit, aerobic of course, that handles our wastewater, recycles it, and then we use it for our landscaping and some part for domestic use as well. So we started with that. We built on it. So we then installed smart gadgets, controlling the flows, using smarter taps itself, the taps with push buttons. So essentially the flow of water itself is lesser. So we've worked on on reducing water consumption, and then of course of late, in 18 months back we did our water harvesting, where we are able to harvest close to 24,000 kiloliters a year. The assumption is that we will have normal rainfall, and for about 5 months in a year, we believe that we should be able to meet our domestic demands basis the harvested water. Okay. So that's something that we've
fantastic.
Done. Right. That's something that we've done so far, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think now there are other things that we need to look at in terms of
just
cooling.
going back to that point, you were talking about rainwater harvesting, and you mentioned that the campus itself is about 8 years old, but the water harvesting was done last year. What did it mean in terms of putting that in place? Did you have to bring in a lot of additional pipes and infrastructure to facilitate that, or were you able to use many of sort of the existing architecture to facilitate that?
We were able to use most of our existing architecture to do that. We had a laid down, well-connected system of stormwater drains. So what we've done essentially is to tap into those. So we've got 200 kiloliters of tanks to harvest water and store them. Plus, we are also using a couple of recharge pits, in fact 3 of them adjacent to our existing bore wells, to recharge the groundwater. Also the landscape, while I think to Shubha's point, there is so much that we can do with treated water in terms of recycled water where we can put to use, but we are seriously looking at whether we could consider some other flora for our landscaping. The landscape that we've used, it's a very thirsty landscape.
Typically lawns consume a lot of water here.
The lawns consume roughly roughly half the water requirement, at least in our campus.
Wow.
So which is quite significant.
And so you're trying to replace it.
We are trying, exactly. So we're trying to see if we could actually, be a little smarter in terms of the flora that we use in our landscape. Use more native species so that it's less thirsty and consumes less water.
And Shubha, if you've kind of heard about what they've done at Tesco, as a water expert, would you then also go on to say that XYZ is also what they could be doing in the future?
So there are 2 things which I think we have to work on going ahead in the future. One was a bit on what he spoke about. When you implement rainwater harvesting in the campus, it's not really just the implementation on the campus, but it's the message that the employees then take back with them. So one is they're aware that their company believes in managing its water wisely. So that's a strong message that's sent down. Some more involvement of the employees within a campus, making sure they take the messages back home, perhaps following through a little bit beyond what's really required from the corporate itself, to enable and ensure that in the personal life that the employees lead. This is kind of inbuilt into their personal lives as well. So that's something on the social aspect that can be worked on. The other thing is also to look at, given that water as a resource, again, if you take the city of Bangalore, there's a cap on the amount of water we can get from the Kaveri river. So obviously the next source of water is groundwater, and that's quickly, the groundwater tables are quickly falling. So to look at rainwater harvesting as a source of water, not just within the campus, but understand its relationships with the groundwater that's available outside. So
which brings me to the point, I think you have 3 groundwater recharge wells, right?
Right.
Yeah, they already have.
Right. Yeah. So actually taking it a little further, so if you look at it a little technically, so groundwater, so to say, is not like a uniform sump below the ground. There are actually aquifers at different levels which are not fully well understood. So let's say we take a particular campus in Bangalore. I know I have a borewell here. I know I'm drawing from a source of water. Okay, I'm trying to recharge it. But what is really the extent? Who else is drawing on it? How much of it is available to me? And how do these group of users then, knowing their source of water, assuming which is finite or replenishable, how do they manage the source themselves? So what really it means is some kind of engagement beyond the fence, which is not, so where we don't look at groundwater as a sump tank below my campus, just something invisible to me, but realize that it's spread across a larger area, which I need to understand. Understanding it at a slightly local level, so let's say wherever their campus, so you've seen that, or as well at a city level, and then see how the aquifer can be managed appropriately by the users. So how do you make sure you're recharging it? Not just us, I mean not just a particular campus, but all the users of that aquifer, where the corporate looks at itself not as an individual entity, but as a group of corporates, apartment associations, people that live around it, and where they kind of get together, understand that this is a resource, finite but replenishable, and figure out how to together manage it. So engagement, I think, would be the way forward beyond conserving itself.
Fantastic. I think I see a sort of a few words repeating in that conversation there. First is the information and the awareness. Second is the communities, both employees as a community, but then also the next thing being corporates in the vicinity being also acting as a community for sort of long-term sustainable change to happen. Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Shubha.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shubha.
Join our mailing list at chaiwithlakshmi.in/subscribe and keep in touch with us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Pinterest.